King's Highwayman. Are you done for the summer? Is that right?
We'll be singing hopefully about once a month. The choir comes back next week.
Okay, well, the choir will be back next week. I'm sorry your phone charging stations under each pew have been delayed, but we'll be working on that. Thank you guys for singing so wonderfully this summer. From Hebrews, let mutual love continue. Do not neglect to show hospitality to strangers, for by doing that some have entertained angels without knowing it. I was ironing a shirt. I'm not bragging, I just do that occasionally. I was ironing a shirt yesterday afternoon, and I was just doing it mindlessly, thinking, this is exactly how my mother taught me to iron a shirt. I don't even think about it. I start at the shoulders and do the arms and whatever the rest of it is, and finish with the collar. You know, that was just ingrained in me as a child because, you know, she said sometime you'll need to iron your own shirts. My wife is not here to say that she has ironed most of my shirts, but I do know how to iron a shirt. She taught me a lot of things. You know, moms aren't perfect, but they work to do a good job. And she taught me to be kind to everyone. And she told me to accept people that were different than I was. Well, that's what she said. But her own fears of the different often shone much brighter than her words. She tried. But prejudices are hard to keep hidden. The Bible makes a point about welcoming the stranger because our human nature tends to be tribal. We like things to be like us, around us. Did you ever think, wouldn't it be great if everyone was just like me? I mean, each of you. Could you imagine for a moment a world of people of all ages that were just like you? You're going to have a bit of a problem reproducing this world. Or we think, wouldn't it be great if the church could just grow with people just like us? Sometimes I feel like the church is looking for young people that are just exactly like old people. Wouldn't it be great if we could just control all of this? It's kind of like leaving God out of the process, though, which is a recipe for more than one kind of failure. Well, let's put God in the process. Words from Hebrews, let mutual love continue. Do not neglect to show hospitality to strangers, for by doing that, some have entertained angels without knowing it. The word stranger is found 62 times in the Bible. Most of those references are descriptive of referring to strangers, but 10 are explicitly positive. For example, from the 5th book of the Hebrew Bible, you shall love the stranger, for you were once strangers in the land of Egypt. Or from Luke, I was hungry and you gave me food, I was thirsty and you gave me something to drink, I was a stranger and you welcomed me. Or from Romans, contribute to the needs of the saints extend hospitality to strangers. A number of years ago, I began to hear the phrase stranger danger. It was based on the idea that children need to be wary of people they do not know, that they might be lured into something through some ruse that that child would be getting into very serious trouble. Well, it's certainly good and wise to teach practical skills for children not to be fooled by predators, although most abuse of children happens within the family by people they know. But we have this concept that stranger may mean danger. I'd like to think today here at Kings Highway that we might refine the word stranger to mean more than just, somebody we don't know or a friend we haven't met yet. Someone who is from a different social class. Someone with a different gender identity. Someone from a different race or ethnicity or sexual orientation or political ideology. Someone who is a different age, has different mental abilities, different physical abilities, a different language skill, a different country of origin, or perhaps a religious background, or indeed any other designation that has brought the pain of exclusion and discrimination by the church. The great Christian writer William Barclay said many years ago, Christianity was and still should be the religion of the open door. Jesus' famous words at the end of Matthew, talking about the Son of Man coming in his glory and the angels with him, and he will sit on a throne and separate the people as the shepherd separates the sheep from the goats, and put the sheep on one hand and the goats on one hand, and will say to those on one side, "Come, you that are blessed by my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you welcomed me. I was naked, and you gave me clothing. I was sick, and you took care of me. I was in prison, and you visited." Well, that is a challenging teaching, isn't it? It's easiest for us to work and help and minister to people of which we are familiar. Hospitality can be expressed in many ways, but it's easily expressed to those people that are kind of like us. But showing hospitality to a whole community of many different kinds of people should be our goal. Taking care of the people that God brings across our path should be our charter. Peter Marty, who's a publisher of Christian Century magazine, wrote, "Living a life aligned with Jesus is extremely difficult. We practice and practice trying to get even a few basics right. It's mostly unglamorous work, as unglamorous as brushing teeth at the bookends of the day or playing scales and arpeggios in endless fashion while learning the piano. I'm thoroughly convinced that nothing resembles expertise in the Christian life. How can you become an expert at receiving the totally undeserved mercy of God on a daily basis? There's a reason we speak meaningfully of practicing the faith. It's all practice. Jesus suggests that we need to reach out to the poor, the crippled, the blind, the lame, the ignored, and the overlooked. And maybe in our time we could add a few people reach out to. The person of color who was profiled. The youth struggling with their gender identity and rejected by their family. The person of a different religion who is looked down upon with suspicion or prejudice or even rage. The immigrant family. The people who hold political views so different than yours that it becomes all too easy to see them as less. It might mean even offering grace and forgiveness to someone in your life who doesn't deserve it and who wouldn't do the same to you. According to Jesus, there's always more room at God's table, and no one, not one person, is to be left out of this feast. 50 years ago, a man named Claude Steiner wrote a little story. And for some of you, back in your memory, you have heard the story. You've probably forgotten about it. It's called a Fuzzy Tale. It's probably not one any of my preaching professors would think that it would be worth your time to listen to in a time of preaching, but I'm telling it anyway. Long ago, there was a land in which when children were born, they were given a gray, fuzzy bag. And in the bag were these things called warm fuzzies. And if you took a warm fuzzy out of the bag and gave it to another person, it would grow in size and smile. And it would become very shaggy. And you would place it on that person's neck or shoulder or abdomen. And the warm fuzzy would kind of snuggle in and give that person a good, positive feeling that they were loved and cared for. People were quite free to give away their warm fuzzies. And one would ask often, they felt like they needed a little boost, and they would ask, and people would reach into the bag and take out a warm fuzzy and give it to them. And it was a happy place. And people lived a long time. But also in this land, there was a witch who made her living by selling salves and ointments and potions to people who were ill. But there weren't a whole lot of people that were ill. So one day she had a brilliant idea. And she approached a man in the kingdom and said, "Do you ever worry about running out of warm fuzzies? Maybe you would reach in your bag and there wouldn't be any left. That would be all there was." And then she rode off on her broom and cackled. And the man thought about that and thought it would be awful to run out of warm fuzzies. Maybe I need to be more careful as to who I give them to. So when people began to ask him from that time on about if they could have a warm fuzzy, he would often decline. And his children noticed that. And they too began to be careful about giving out warm fuzzies. And pretty soon, hardly anybody was giving out warm fuzzies. And because of that, people got sick and some died. Well, the witch was happy that people got sick, but she didn't want anybody to die because she would lose a customer. So she came up with another idea. She began to give out bags of cold pricklies that one could give to another. You would ask for a warm fuzzy and you'd give them a cold prickly. Well, it wasn't nearly as nice as a warm fuzzy. In fact, it wasn't very nice at all, but it was something, and as you know, if you are involved in education, people would rather have negative attention than no attention at all. So people kind of got along, and some folks tried to decorate their cold prickly to look like a warm fuzzy, but that was pretty much a disaster, and so they had these little plastic things that they carried around and gave them no comfort at all. Things declined in the kingdom until one day a strong woman moved to this place and began to freely give out her warm fuzzies. And people noticed, and they began to ask, "Why are you doing that?" And she said, "You're not going to run out." But they were worried that they would be running out of warm fuzzies. So they got together and they passed some laws that you couldn't be excessive in giving out warm fuzzies. And that's how I'll leave the story. People fighting over whether it was all right to give an unlimited number of warm fuzzies, or one had to be restricted because we might run out. Right now, we have more practicing to do of our Christianity. We need to practice the gift of hospitality. In this time in our history, we don't need to go right or left. We need to go deep. We need the clarity of the Word. Fortunately for us, God's invitation is always open. It's always now that we are invited to experience God's grace and love. It is now that we are invited to sit at God's table with all of God's children. And it is an invitation not just to answer, but to extend to others, especially to the children of God who desperately need to know now that they too are worthy, that they too are loved, and that they too, just like us, are strangers no more. May we pray. God, for the wisdom to know that your love is endless. Your grace is without a stopping place. And we, as your children, can learn from your beautiful and wonderful example of giving. Help us to be brave, to reach out, to care, to take care of those persons that cross our path, that they would know of your love, your salvation, your eternal hope in Christ. Amen.